And welcome back into another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, and this week we have with us, I would say, someone, I guess, pioneering the AI march upon Hollywood, but in a positive way. Like, not to, for those of you worried, his name is Caleb Ward, and his company is Curious Refuge. Caleb, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And you're actually based in not necessarily Hollywood, but LA. I mean, we can call it Hollywood. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we're based in Burbank, and we can see all the big major studios from our house.
So I think the thing that interested me about what you guys are doing is you're kind of acting as kind of like, I don't know, a quick path for creatives who want to begin to engage with the tools, but they just, they don't know where to start. And before I get into that, I just want to ask, like, you kind of made it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like Curious Refuge made like a pivot from kind of like a productivity hack company into focusing on AI. Like, am I right on that? And if so, like, what made you make the pivot?
Right, yeah. So that's a bit of a misconception, and I get why people think that because they see, let's say, our YouTube channel, and they see that we were doing, like, for example, like Notion or Squarespace videos before we started doing AI. But Curious Refuge had been contracted by VFX companies, motion design companies who are in the education space. And so for years, my wife Shelby and I, who run Curious Refuge, have been helping grow some of the most important VFX schools in the world. We just hadn't been super public about it. And so, we've very much been in the industry. We helped to set up like training, for example, for DNEG whenever they ended up winning the Oscar for visual effects for the latest Avatar film. So very much involved in the world of Hollywood, just not as outspoken about it on Curious Refuge, which was more of our creative outlet, just for fun little things that we were geeking out over. But we were very much working on a ton of creative projects for those companies, and getting tutorials out there, short films, trailers, just the gamut of interesting online content related to Houdini, Nuke, After Effects, Cinema 4D, all the more high end software. And so for us, basically, the pivot essentially happened when we started running some experiments with artificial intelligence. As being people who are interested in technology, obviously we've been tracking and playing with, Dolly, Midjourney, ChatGPT for a while, but because of our background in the film world, we were very curious about how does this play out? Can AI be used to tell a story? And so that kind of led us into testing out some of these tools. And because of our background in the education space, it made sense to teach what we know to the community.
And so just take me back a little bit further. So first of all, how long have you guys been doing this in terms of like training Hollywood professionals and I guess studios? And what's your actual, like, your personal background, like, I guess technically, academically, like how'd you come to this place?
Yeah, so I started probably in the same way that many people in the film industry and just the creative industries got their start, and that's being a teenager, making funny, silly videos, and really falling in love with the creative process. And I ended up going to college for radio and film, and from there got a job working at a company called premiumbeat.com. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They do like royalty free music basically. So I got a job working at Premium Beat, and essentially they're a royalty-free music company. And part of the way in which they would get their target demographic to the website, which was video editors, filmmakers, producers, people like that, was to create content. So video tutorials, articles, free assets, all related to helping creatives in their craft. And so I got to lead that team for a while, which was really fun. And then transitioned over to working at a company called School of Motion. They do After Effects and Cinema 4D boot camps, so kind of long form training, and got a ton of just really great experience leading their team and creating videos and campaigns, and really just being involved in the process of what it looks like to have an online school in a artistic world. And then from there, started working with a company called Rebelway. And so they are the world's best school for Houdini and Nuke. And so got to work with them to train all the biggest studios and artists who were, all the way from aspiring artists in the industry to very high end, artists that are just killing it at, the biggest studios like Industrial Light and Magic. And so it was really cool to just be involved in all of those schools and organizations. And what I really found is I really love not only the process of putting a creative project together, but also learning and sharing what I'm learning in that process as well. I get just as much out of sharing what I'm learning as opposed to just getting the finished work out there. So I have like a very big heart for learning and education. And so as these AI tools started to come out, it was a very natural transition for me to begin to share what I'm learning.
Got it. So you've been, I guess, at ground zero, watching, I guess, the transition from, uh, or as we're entering the transition from traditional VFX to AI assisted, and in some cases, completely AI driven effects. When just travel around Hollywood and you go to the parties in Hollywood Hills or DTLA or wherever, and you talk to various professionals, I'm sure you're particularly, kind of what's going on. Again, we'll get into that later in terms of the strikes. But when you speak to these people, do you get a sense that like your average VFX artist, editor, even like an editor who isn't involved in VFX, do you get a sense that these people in Hollywood proper are actually aware of that they need to begin to engaging these tools? Is there kind of like some sort of denial? Like what's the attitude when you're kind of off the record talking to these people?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think people have strong opinions. It's almost like politics. Like people have strong opinions and they tend to be polarized in those opinions. To those that embrace it, and I would say the majority, especially because I tend to run a little bit more in the technical world as it relates to Hollywood, those people tend to be a little more accepting and optimistic about just what this means. Because, obviously, if your background is being on a computer, figuring out technical challenges and how that relates to creativity, AI is at its core very much, a tool that's doing that for you. But it's very funny because there are some, like for example, VFX artists that are also like very hesitant to use the technology, even though up to this point in their career they've based their entire careers on learning the latest technology and workflows and things like that. So it is very interesting to see how different mindsets shift. I would say that folks who are more in the I would say conceptual side of Hollywood. So, screenwriters, producers, people that, are really the ones that are crafting the story more in their head as opposed to like boots on the ground tend to be a little more nervous about what it means, whereas, lighting directors and things like that I've talked to aren't quite as nervous because, it's very hard for an AI to show up on your film set and move a light from one here to there, right? So I think it's really interesting to see that it, I would say like 50-50. 50% of people are optimistic, 50% of people are pessimistic. I'd say the majority of people that I've talked to that are pessimistic haven't actually used the tools to realize where the limitations are, because there's some very real limitations at this point. If you've ever tried to write a script in ChatGPT, it's not a quality script. Like you can't use that script to, tell a super convincing story. So there's just some clear limitations in where I really feel like people, I would really encourage people to start just trying out some of these tools to make an informed opinion for themselves as opposed to just, reading on the news.
Okay, and so let's talk about that, using the tools, getting these creatives to use the tools. So you created something, you and your partner created something called the AI Filmmaking Bootcamp. And I believe the next edition starts September 1st. So this is right around the time when, people would sign up. And I guess I went through the course. I kind of looked at the curriculum and kind of what you're like. Can you break it down? Like, what exactly do people get when they enter this AI filmmaking bootcamp?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because traditionally, whenever I've worked on putting together courses, it's been for people that are at a certain level, right? Like if you're putting together, let's say, a Houdini course, like that's a very advanced visual effects software. Not only do you have to have a certain level of technical prowess, you also have to have experience using 3D applications, and you can't just jump into it. Whereas with these AI tools, really you can start using these AI tools if you have never opened up, for example, like a program like Photoshop before. And so you really are able to create something from nothing if you are new to the applications. And so it's very interesting because we have the entire gamut of folks from, literal Academy Award winners going through the program to like an 11-year-old girl. And so, you know, because of that, the beginning of the program is a lot more foundational. Here's how to tell a story. Here's how filmmakers, use imagery and symbolism and character arcs and things like that to tell a compelling story. Here's how you can use AI tools to assist with that process, not replace that process, but just assist you through whatever creative hurdles you have. And so we start out through by creating film concepts and storyboards, that we move on to creating AI trailer pitches, like pitching your idea basically, so that you could literally take your homework assignment and hypothetically show it to a decision maker who might be like, yeah, absolutely, I love this idea. Like, let's move forward with it. And then in the last few weeks, we get into compositing and visual effects and just some more advanced, just more technical components. And altogether, by the end of the program, people are able to create, to the best of their ability, an AI assisted short film. And so, that still comes with limitations at this point because the technology is still progressing. But at the very least, they're able to approach the pre-visualization side of a concept and visually show through literally a video what they want their final project to look like, which is really cool.
It's interesting. You mentioned there was an Academy Award winner in one of your groups and your cohorts, and I'm just curious, when you spoke to this person or interacted, or when your team interacted with this person, were they an outlier? Meaning, is it fairly? Are most of your students professionals? I know you say you had some amateurs, but I mean, like, for me, that's kind of impressive, just because there's so much, I guess, fear and just kind of like reactive distaste for AI coming from the ranks of Hollywood. So is that an outlier case? Is that common? Like,
Yeah, I would say if like we had to create a scale, like one being, an 11-year-old girl that's never touched a creative program in her life, to all the way 10 being like an Academy Award winner that's like working on the biggest projects like out here in Hollywood. I'd say our range skews about 6 or 7. So I mean, we have people who are, directors, writers in the guild going through our program right now. Especially, in light of the strikes that are happening, people have a lot more free time on their hands. And so, many folks are like, well, if AI is inevitable, then, I want to stay up to date on what these tools are capable of doing. So it does tend to skew a little more professional, but I've designed the training so that people who don't have that background or just that knowledge base are able to um, also create really impressive things.
so, and going through the curriculum. So, as someone myself who's deeply engaged in using the tools, again, I'm not really producing front facing, public facing films or anything, but I'm, I could very easily, because I love this stuff and I'm immersed in it. But there are some things that get extra technical, particularly when you're trying to mix, let's say, traditional digital software with some of the AI tools. Do you have any plans to kind of like introduce, I don't know, like a master's AI boot camp, or a master's, or VIP, or, whatever, some next level for the people who kind of already are conversant in the basic foundational AI tools, but want to like take it to the next level?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'd say that our course basically takes you from, it's like a beginner and intermediate course. And then whenever we're talking about doing, like you said, like master's level, like how do we get something that is going to be technically like silver screen quality? I've already been in conversations with folks to bring that into reality. One of the interesting technical challenges with being in the AI space is the pipelines and the workflows. With one update that happens randomly on, like, let's say a Tuesday, can completely upend the way in which you would approach long form training. And so we've been really thinking about how we are going to approach Curious Refuge in the future in terms of, providing these month-long boot camps as opposed to just more of a library that people access. We'll just have to see, how the tools ebb and flow. Perhaps, things will find a level of stasis, or, if anything like this last summer is, if that's the pattern, then it's just, complete upending workflows week after week, in the indefinite future. So we'll just have to see, and we'll address that as it makes sense.
Yeah, I probably should have started with this. You guys went viral. Um, there's so many AI tools out there, so many different examples, a lot of people on Instagram, on Twitter, kind of showing their work. But you guys went viral for something very clever. You basically took kind of the style of Wes Anderson, the very distinctive film style of Wes Anderson, and you applied it to kind of well-known franchises. I think one was Star Wars. Wes Anderson meets Star Wars. Wes Anderson meets Lord of the Rings, and Wes Anderson meets Avatar, I think it was.
Hmm.
And it really worked. It really kind of gave this brilliant kind of like alternate universe take on what these films might look like if Wes Anderson had, directed them. And so, I mean, just can you just like unpack like what was the I guess inspiration to do that, and when you got reactions, not just from just regular people, but from Hollywood, what were the reactions to your decision to take those particular cases and play with them in public?
Yeah, yeah. So that project was really, it was just a side project. I was really curious because of my background in storytelling. I'd seen projects like the Harry Potter Balenciaga project and the, SpongeBob SquarePants as like a dark 80s fantasy film, like videos that were popping up on YouTube. And those were really interesting, but they weren't really like telling a story. They were more just kind of a slideshow. And whenever I was looking at these tools, I was like, well, we have ChatGPT here and it can write maybe not a great script, but it can write a script. And we have Midjourney over here that can create imagery, and then some other tools that can do, facial animations and movements. I was like, well, all the core components are here to do a concept trailer. So like what would it look like to have AI put this thing together? And so it was entirely an experiment. It wasn't me like saying like look at my beautiful artwork that like is going to change the industry forever. It was like I just wanted to see where the ceiling was in terms of quality that could be produced from these tools. And so I had ChatGPT come up with the idea, write the script, help me with the shot list, went to Midjourney. Obviously, there's a back and forth process there with curation and putting it together, and just edit it together just in Adobe Premiere, super easy, and put it together on my laptop. It only took about 20 hours and put it out there. And really, my hope was I just want to put this out there. If people like it, I'll do like, I don't know, maybe like a little bit of training about, how we put it together, but like no pressure, like it's just for fun. And I went to bed, I posted on like a Friday, went to bed, it had like 200 views. And then when I woke up, it was like 500,000 views and had gone really mega viral. And that day it started getting picked up on like movie blogs, just like people that are like interested in covering movie related pop culture stuff. And then the next day I was like playing Mario Kart and I get a ping on my phone and like the Hollywood Reporter had picked it up. And after that, it was most major like publications have talked about one of our projects up to that point. And so it's been really interesting. And the funny thing is, so when we put it out there at first, it was like overwhelmingly positive, like positive across the board. Everyone was just like, this is awesome, so cool, so clever. Like, this is really interesting, really is getting me thinking about, the future of creativity. And then when some of the bigger publications started putting, their messaging out there, they would like write a story like people are divided over this whole thing. And it's like, we had a Twitter thread with, 1,000 comments and like 3 of them are negative, and they're like finding the negative ones to like put in there. And so it's been really interesting to see how the media has been really trying to like make it seem like this like equal weighted polarization whenever most of the people that we interact with online. It's been incredibly positive.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I just published the latest newsletter. We do a newsletter called the 100 Year Lens. You guys can visit it at Substack 100year.substack.com. And in that, I talk about kind of the recent legal case where they found that just completely uh, solely AI generated content cannot be copywritten, and the judge ruled that there must be some human hand involved for it to actually have a
Mhm.
copyright. And I think that's kind of like the crux of, or that's kind of for people, I guess, in the traditional creative industry. From my vantage point, that's where they need to look to in terms of like reducing their fear. Meaning, at least on this podcast, we keep talking about AI as a way to augment your skills as opposed to
Mhm.
replace it. Now, we all know
Yeah.
software isn't static, it always improves, and there will, likely at some point be software that can do certain things, all on its own. But in terms of interacting with other humans, generally, at least for now, humans want to know that a story or a narrative or an experience comes from someone that has human experiences. I'll give an example. Like, so you guys on the Curious Refuge YouTube channel, you guys created like a virtual host reading jokes. Am I right? Is that what was his name?
Yeah, yeah, mhm.
You guys gave him some
Al
interesting name. What was his name?
Al Powers.
Al Powers, right?
Al
Yeah.
Powers.
And he, for me, I thought it was brilliant, by the way. Let me just start by saying that it was brilliant. But in terms of the humor, it didn't land for me. It was about as funny
Sure.
as Trevor Noah, which, I'm not a fan of Trevor Noah. So it wasn't very funny to me. But there
Yeah.
was one joke that kind of like, I guess, encapsulated where I come from on all this. The AI host talks about, his trip to the gym and his eating habits with kale. This is an AI. You're not eating
Yeah.
kale. You're not taking a trip to the gym. You don't have to worry about,
Yeah,
do you have to wait for the weight bench on, when you're whatever
yeah,
Equinox or LA Fitness or
right,
whatever. And so it's all made up. You don't, you're an
right,
AI. You didn't, or you're a virtual character. You didn't really experience this. And so I think as much as the tools can enhance our ability to create interesting experiences, I think, at least in large part, not always, but in large part, humans want to know that they're getting an experience from another human that can relate to them, that they can relate to. And
right.
so that's why I like the way you kind of framed what you guys are doing earlier as a way to kind of enhance your ability to create, films as opposed to just, I don't know, clicking a button and, just outputting something. Is it, I mean, are you on the same page? Do you disagree?
I totally agree. Yeah, these tools, if you really get into the weeds and start messing around with them, you'll quickly realize how much humanity is involved to make a good project using AI tools. It's very much a human experience. And for that specific project that you're talking about is very interesting. Basically, I got the news, like AI generated news from Bard, Google's Bard, because it can connect to the internet, and got the news for the day, and then took that news, put it into ChatGPT. It was like, hey, can you write some jokes for each one of these? And it was still a human experience because I had to see the list of jokes, pick and choose the ones that I want to put in there, right? Like I'm not just picking the first joke that they put, into the actual script. And so it's very interesting because I think for all of us, whenever we are approaching a creative project, I think there are certain aspects of that creative project that can be limiting or can be a creative hurdle for you. And it really depends from person to person. So for example, if we're like talking about, writing jokes for a news segment, for some people it's like getting that first joke is like really hard, but like once they have one joke, they can like add to it, jump off of it, and then like after five quick iterations, they've created something that's really, really funny. Whereas sometimes it's the opposite for other people. Like they're like rock stars at getting that first joke, but it's not that funny and they can't like get it to the finish line or like, manipulate it. And so it can be nice to be able to just like have a joke and put it into ChatGPT and like, hey, can you do like 10 variants? And I just want like, I'm just creatively, like, it's not about me wanting to just take that joke and like remove the context or like remove the humanity, but it's just like, I want like a springboard. It's almost like working with a Pinterest board, for a creative project. Like, it's just like, I want just like a mood board, something that I can just jump off of. And I find that AI in almost every application is it works like that. It's more about helping you to get inspired through your creative direction as opposed to just hitting a brick wall creatively and being like, oh man, okay, this project can't progress further.
Let's talk about the tools. You have a section on Curious Refuge where you talk about kind of like it's not, you're not giving awards, but it's almost like awards, like best this, best that, but best tool for
Yeah.
this, best tool for that. And it looked like the overall tool was Midjourney, and then you also mentioned runwayml, Topaz for kind of like I guess taking your visuals to high resolution, to a higher resolution level. And
Yep.
I'm curious, like right now, I'm watching with runwayml, particularly this new feature that allows you, and it's a little bit longer now, that allows you to animate your mid-journey images. Like this is still the beginning. Like, have you like where like just give me a like just how do you see like the recent, I guess, change in the tools, and even Midjourney has like they have like the new, I guess, zoom out feature. You can kind of regenerate, certain regions. Like
Mhm.
where are you excited about this? Are you seeing from your vantage point more like in social media? Do you see like the memes becoming all AI because of these, easy to use tools? Like where are you at on this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we will see a ton of AI memes probably for the rest of our life. I think it's inevitable. But in terms of like just the sheer velocity in which these new features and updates are happening, I mean, it's almost a full-time job just staying up to date on the news and
It
seeing what
is.
people are doing. On Twitter is one of my favorite places because I think you can almost in real time see the application of some sort of new feature that would have gone unnoticed and what it means like in a storytelling context or like an artistic context. And so, yeah, we try to stay up to date on like the latest tools and techniques. And when you have a boot camp that has I don't know how many modules we have, like over 50. It can be sometimes like a little annoying whenever a new update happens to something, and then you're like, well, we're gonna go re-record these videos, I guess,
Right, 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 right.
which is totally fine. It's just a part of the nature of what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, all these new tools are very, very exciting, and it's really fun to, as a nerd, see like certain things that some people do, and like, okay, you're like, okay, this person did this cool animation project and like use runway and like we're able to get this. If I take that concept with this like lip syncing thing, maybe I can make my own animated cartoon. Let's test that out and try it. And so many people are doing that, and I feel very similar to like the first time whenever I was learning, for example, like After Effects, and like I would watch a tutorial and like follow along, and by the end of it, it's like, oh, cool, I have like this cool like spaceship thing, right? I feel the same way with these AI tools. It's just like just a kind of a playground, a sandbox for you to let your own creative imaginings take you to different places. And I think one thing that's helped me is having a background in creativity has allowed me to contextualize a little faster. Like, okay, we have this tool that can do this. Where can we plug it into the pipeline? And so I think that's important, and it makes it to where it's a little more challenging for folks if you have absolutely no background in creativity to create a trailer or a short film or something like that, because there's still those fundamental skills of video editing, storytelling, and things like that that have not been fully addressed by AI up to this point.
I mean, I know your course is more so designed on the technical level in terms of using the tools, but given where you're located in Hollywood and some of the people you engage with, yeah, some of this has to do with how you pitch. And I'm wondering, do you think pitch a project, a film, or TV
Mhm.
show? Do you would you advise against or for, let's say someone, let's say newer or even I guess experienced in Hollywood, maybe beginning to pitch new projects with an AI example, in the same way
Mhm.
you just like have a rough draft of a script, or kind of like the way kind of like I say an indie film guy would like shoot 10
Mhm.
minutes of something he wants to
Right.
turn into a film or TV show. Would you suggest people like moving in that direction with AI, or is that a little too early? Might it be off-putting to some studios, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the studios, in light of just everything going on, there's a bit of hesitation to outwardly acknowledging artificial intelligence because they're trying to keep artists happy, and there's a certain rhetoric that they're trying to keep as it relates to the tools. But behind closed doors, every single studio I've talked to is embracing AI in the pre-visualization process. And so I would say if you have a story, like for example, if you are a writer and you have a vision for a story, Absolutely. Like if you can, like, go through training, doesn't have to be Curious Refuge, but just learn how to use these tools, because you could absolutely create a concept trailer that, it may not be exactly the way that you envision it, but it could be pretty darn close. And so I think it's an amazing superpower that is absolutely helpful for sharing your creative vision. And even if you don't use it to pitch your idea specifically to a studio, I do think studios, if you came to them, I have an AI trailer and a story, and like, here, want to talk, I think, you could probably open a few doors that way, as long as you're connected to the right folks. But even if you just wanted to use your conceptualization for your own personal gratification in seeing kind of how that idea might translate visually, or if you're collaborating with a cinematographer or a lighting director, hey guys, generally this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? And they can use these AI tools. I've been chatting with a guy who, he's directing a fairly big project right now, and he's using AI to help put together the storyboards and the concepts, and like even in the visual effects side of things, a big part of your VFX budget is spent doing research. A lot of people don't realize that it's figuring out how, like, what exactly it is that you want and then implementing it. And so if you're able to use AI to more or less show like, hey, here's what I want, I just want the really polished version, that's going to save you a heck of a lot of time. And the artists that are, working on that, it's going to give them the art direction to get started and to make headway a lot faster than, if it's just like, I don't know, I'm thinking like an explosion over here, what do you got?
Are concept artists? I mean, are they in trouble? Like, what's going on? Like, because there are a lot of different positions in Hollywood in the production process that absolutely still need a human hand and can only be augmented. But I saw, like, I would say, like, this time last year, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but a very well-known concept artist who works with Hollywood studios was talking about AI and how generative AI might kind of like, you know, you know, put some people's positions in peril. Like, do you agree with that? Do you see that?
Well, it's interesting. And I think this goes with any job in Hollywood, or probably anything beyond Hollywood as well. It's not about your job being replaced by AI. AI is not going to replace your job. AI, people using AI will more than likely replace your job. And so if I was a concept artist, I absolutely, because my entire job is about visualizing, conceptualizing, show, and if I understood what the pitch process is like and what directors are looking for, I would absolutely be using midjourney to put my ideas together. I would learn about the composition and then take my traditional skills, whether it's using digital tools to manipulate like Photoshop, or if it's literally using your rough sketches to help guide as reference imagery the composition for the project that you're putting together. I think it's important to begin to embrace these tools. And so, sure, like I would say, if you're unwilling to learn the new tech, like maybe there is a chance that your job could be at risk. But if you embrace it, I think your job might become much easier. You might be able to have an even higher level of professionalism as it relates to your job. It's going to open up a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, AI is absolutely changing the way all of us approach our work, from concept art all the way to accounting.
This might be a little unfair, but I want your kind of insider Hollywood take on this occurrence. It was a few months ago. Disney released what was it? Secret
Yeah.
Invasion, I think it's called, with Samuel L. Jackson, and the intro to the TV series, short, mini series, is all AI generated, and the reaction to that was widely, negative. I mean, do you think that's kind of like a bellwether for how Hollywood will react to AI in general? Do you think that was an outlier and it was just poorly done? Like, did you see it? What
Yeah,
was
I
your
watched it. Yeah.
thought on the reaction to it?
Well, it's very interesting. So that piece came out about a month after we started doing our AI experiments. And so there's a lot more context for that piece that people don't realize, and that's many, many artists worked on that project to get it to come to fruition. And it wasn't, again, I think the idea is that they just typed in a prompt, I want a cool alien intro, go, and that's 100% false. Like that is not at all like that process. Like literal code was written by like incredibly talented software engineers to implement that. And so unfortunately, I think it got a lot of negative criticism because it had the word AI in it during a writer's strike, and people had opinions about that, and they were looking for a common enemy to help with bargaining and things like that. And I totally understand that. I think the hate towards that project, it makes me sad for the artists that actually did work on that, because it wasn't entirely an art like an AI project. Now, in terms of technical implementation or artistic direction, is it the coolest title sequence I've ever seen? Probably not. But, you know,
Right,
thinking
right.
about thematically what that overall show is trying to say and the direction in which they're trying to go with it, having a team that's working on a cutting edge, creative platform to create the titles for it, I don't think is an inappropriate choice, but you can have your opinion one way or another about it.
Yeah, I mean, as a Marvel fan and someone who is deeply invested in the Super Scrolls storyline from many years ago, when I think about it, yeah, kind of the way they did it made sense. The kind of like morphing and all of that. I guess I just wasn't a fan of just the general look, but I was just taken aback at the very strong negative response to that. But let's stay on negative for a second. You brought up the writer's strike, and I wanted to. This is being recorded just a day, I think, after the Hollywood studios that are in negotiations with the WGA, Writers Guild of America. They posted their negotiating points on, the various asks from the organization, and one of them touches on AI. And I wanted to read a couple of sections here
Mhm.
very briefly. Let's see. And this is from the Hollywood studios. The actual official name is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. And this is their counteroffer to the Writers Guild of America. This came out, yeah, earlier this week. Um, so this is their proposal. The companies confirm that because generative AI is not a person, it is not a quote unquote writer or professional writer as defined in the minimum bargaining agreement. Therefore, written material produced by generative AI will not be considered literary material under this or any prior minimum bargaining agreement. If any part of the script is based on generative AI produced material, the writer's compensation, credit, separated rights will not be affected by the use of that generative AI produced material.
Mhm.
And then I want to touch on some of this, but one last part. The company, meaning the Hollywood studio, gives a writer if the company gives a writer a generative AI produced screenplay, meaning, you know, ChatGPT outputs a script, screenplay, whatever tool they've created. Maybe they have a proprietary tool. If the studio asks the writer to rewrite it, meaning, hey, this generative AI tool wrote a script, but we want you to polish it up, make it better, make it more human, blah, blah, blah. They say the writer will receive the fee for a screenplay with no assigned material and not a rewrite. So, in other words, it seems like they're saying the writer will be treated that the human writer's work will be treated as original, as opposed to, just brushing up someone else's work. And then that passage goes on to say, if the company gives a writer a generative AI produced story as the basis for a teleplay, the writer will receive the story and teleplay rate. So AI won't reduce your payment,
Yeah.
is what they seem to be saying. The generative AI produced written material will not be considered source material for purposes of determining a writer's credit. So that's all very interesting, because I feel like this entire discussion about what AI would do to writers in Hollywood, part of the fear revolved around the vagaries. Like, at least I heard a couple of WGA union members saying that the studios kind of didn't want to talk about this right now. Let's talk about that later. The technology is still kind of in flux. Let's get to that later. This seems to give at least some specificity as to how the studios will handle this. Um, so hearing all that, I tried to break it down to like the simplest
Mhm.
components. What's your first reaction? Like, just and I know you're not necessarily. I'm sure you've probably written screenplays. Everyone in Hollywood has written screenplays, but I'm just saying, like, what's your initial reaction to kind of like what the studios are proposing?
Yeah, and so in response to that, I would say I'm only addressing this very narrow, specific part of that overall directorial or studio response to the WGA's demands. So I think it's really cool that, at least at this point, what studios are saying is, even if you use AI, like they're allowing screenwriters to use AI to create projects, and allowing the tool to be implemented into the workflow, but they're still acknowledging that the writer ultimately will get the full compensation and the full credit as the human that's driving the creativity forward. And so, at least in these talking points, I think it's very interesting, and I think it's it's cool that the artist ultimately will get the credit, and they will get their due, even if they decide to use ChatGPT to, let's say, assist them in the process. Because for writers, like, the hope is that they can live productive and super fruitful lives with great balance. And, if these AI tools help you just get, 10 to 15% faster, well, hopefully, like, you would still make the same amount of money. It sounds like from this contract that they would get the same amount of money, and I think there's even like some additional revenue that would be put on top of that with the contract deal in the way that it currently is. So at least in this small scope, I think it's a win for artists. And who knows how things will progress over the next few years, but at this point, just for at least the AI clauses, I think that's a cool win.
Yeah, and I was quite surprised by what they were proposing because it kind of at least in general seems to lock them into certain obligations to the human writers.
Mhm.
But there's something kind of underlying. Sometimes they say it's not the answer to the question; it's that the question was asked. Kind of tells you more about what you're trying to know about a very whatever situation. And the thing for me in their proposal, in the studio's proposal, this stood out to me. Again, if the company gives a writer a generative AI produced screenplay and asks the writer to rewrite it, I think previously the conversation was, my fear is that the studio might do such a thing,
Mm.
generate an AI generated script and then ask a human to polish it up. That was just kind of like a speculation. This is confirmation
Mm.
that not necessarily that they will do it, but that the studios want to keep that in their toolkit or in their arsenal as a possibility. And whatever rights and negotiations and concessions they give to human writers, I found it very interesting that like in answering these questions in their proposal, that they essentially confirmed we will be
Yeah.
as studios, we will be using
Yeah.
AI to generate some portion of, be it story ideas, script, rough script drafts. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. And this doesn't speak to, I guess, the Screen Actors Guild AFTRA concerns with regard to the rights of, human actors and their visuals. But this is the most specificity I've seen with regard to the studios and AI, at all, like since this whole conversation began. So it's pretty interesting, pretty exciting. But it also kind of, it's confirmation that this is coming, and
Yeah.
it's not like the studios are going to somehow suddenly, look up and or come into the negotiating room. Yeah, we're not going to use AI.
Right.
We've decided we want to keep this old school, and AI will just be for spreadsheets and whatever for other industries. No, it's coming to Hollywood, and that passage was confirmation, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you have a bunch of friends in the space. Like, what? Oh, you wanted to respond to that? If you wanted to address that point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't even catch that. But yeah, I mean, that's absolutely them confirming that they will be using it going forward. Now, me just being boots on the ground and having all of these conversations with folks, like, yes, like script writing outside of ChatGPT, there's a ton of tools that are out there that are already trying to use AI to specifically, like, they're tailoring the AI specifically for screenwriting, and those tools are in development and are only getting better. And that's just scratching the surface of the overall AI tools that are like being implemented at the executive level in Hollywood, in terms of predicting success of films, coming up with, potential IP acquisition ideas, or even just, original ideas that haven't existed and how that will relate to online trends that are emerging. Like there are some very, very deep and very corporate level tools that are being developed that these studio executives and decision makers are watching and are actively subscribed to. And so it's very interesting, because I think for me, I was already operating under the assumption that everyone knew that that was going to be happening. So yeah, I think it is interesting, and hopefully writers will be able to take those projects and inject as much human creativity as possible. Not to disparage the industry, and I won't get into too many specifics, but there's a lot of projects that we see that hit theaters that are incredibly derivative, or aren't artistically saying a lot besides, hey, come watch this film, it has this actor doing this thing, and then you leave and you're like, oh man, that was probably a waste of 2 hours, right? So that happens a lot, and I think that sometimes I walk out of a theater and I'm like, man, I wish there would have been more creativity injected into this process. So maybe AI can help with that. Maybe AI will help to alleviate some of those derivative scripts, or some of those projects that don't feel quite as artistically like they have a lot of teeth to them. But who knows? I think really it's going to come down to just artists creating like really good stories, and I hope that they can embrace these tools.
Yeah, and I think maybe like a shorthand translation of what you just said would be: don't blame sucky movies on AI in the coming 5, 10 years, because terrible movies existed long before AI.
And
But I'm curious though.
to address your point, just one quick thing, and don't blame sucky movies on screenwriters either. I think most
Right.
ideas that I've seen coming out of Hollywood, like directly from screenwriters, like tend to be pretty interesting stories. It's just in the executives that take the projects that cut the heart and the soul out of it because they're trying to get to certain story beats that will be better for merchandising or promoting the film, and then the entire project starts to fall apart. So I think hopefully maybe there's even AI tools that can help with recognizing certain important story components that need to be there, or the whole story begins to fall apart or not resonate with people. I don't know, like it's kind of a guessing game at this point, but I
Yeah.
yeah.
Creativity is an art and science, but the art part is really important. And I think an example of what you just said, not related to AI, was the Justice League movie by Zack Snyder, where they kind of the studio put out what they wanted, and then something that rarely ever happens in Hollywood. Zack Snyder actually got an opportunity to kind of produce his vision, and the reviews and the reaction was so much better to the
Mhm.
Justice League movie
Mhm.
when the director's vision was like represented as he wanted it. So that's important to remember. I'm just curious, like, so we know a lot of people will take shortcuts using these tools. Some people will use them brilliantly, and with kind of like a scalpel as
Mm.
opposed to a hammer.
Yeah.
But do you think because some of these tools make the entryway into filmmaking a little bit easier for people who aren't traditionally trained, do you think this will kind of lead to a lot of, I'll just say, garbage? Do you think we're in for kind of like a period or an era of just a lot of AI generated films that you know just aren't that good, and we're going to have to just wade through that? Like, was that, am I being too pessimistic?
No, I mean, I think you can make a direct comparison. For example, we, up until like 20 years ago, didn't have like a literal like camera phone that we could like go and make, videos out of like any part of day to day life. And so, really, if you watched anything up to that point, it had to go through a traditional, let's say, Hollywood process or television pipeline for you to consume it. And now, there's more content than a billion lifetimes could possibly consume out there, but the majority of it is just absolute nonsense, right? Or at least stuff that's not saying something deeply on an artistic level. It's just kind of content that exists for its own sake. I think that we probably will see a lot of projects that come out, but generally the cream rises to the top. And so, yes, we're probably going to see just a lot of like really silly videos that are just like people playing around, and literally no shade to those people. Like if they're having fun and they're creating something that they enjoy, I don't want to judge if that project's bad or good. Like I want to support them as an artist and not be a personal, like a gatekeeper that's saying they can't create art or they're not creating art because it doesn't meet my qualification standards. I feel like that's very like, that would be very hypocritical of me. Right. But what I want to do is find the stories that resonate with me and make sure that I'm supporting the artists that are creating those. And so what I think is going to happen going forward is stories are going to become much more niche. I think that, if you really resonate with a certain type of story, because the barrier to entry to get that type of story out there is going to be so much lower, I think we're going to see a lot more, not only representation in the content and the films that are created, but also just generally you're going to find that like subsection niche community. If you're just really into like mid-century modernism as it relates to like this idea of like a utopian future and how that relates to like this dystopian reality that we have today, and that type of specific story arc resonates with you, like you're going to see a ton of films that like have those narrative themes. And so they may not be at the quality of like Everything Everywhere, but because they thematically really resonate with you, you can forgive, the quality differences. And so I think we're going to see a lot of stuff like that. And we already see that with YouTube. Gen Z spends like the majority of their time on YouTube compared to like watching traditional films. And I think that it's because they find niche communities that really resonate with things that are important to them. And so, I think we're going to start seeing AI films that do the same thing in just more specific niches that resonate with, a smaller audience, but deeper.
Yeah, and I want to begin to wrap up, but speaking of the cream rising to the top, I wanted to highlight on your website you have kind of like an AI film gallery. And it's not necessarily people who particularly went through your program, at least from my
Right.
understanding. It's just you are curating some of the best work that you're seeing in this very new emerging field. And it's brilliant. I've seen some brilliant things on there. And I actually wanted to mention like one of our team, Kavan. Kavan, are you around? Can you pop in? Let's see if Kavan's able
What's
to.
up,
Hey,
guys?
Kavan. So for those of you who don't know, Kavan, he's our editor. He's like he helps us produce everything. He's just like one of the core parts of the podcast, the 100 Year Podcast. And he's also experimenting with the tools. And we had a conversation the other day, and you were telling me that you actually got something. You didn't necessarily go through the course, but you got something from the Curious Refuge site.
Yeah, on the last short film that I made, I actually saw your guys' YouTube video that you put out on AI short films, and I checked that out, and I found it incredibly beneficial and super helpful. I mean, I ended up actually purchasing a Topaz Labs AI video after it because just the enhancements it does to Runway ML is truly phenomenal.
That's
Yeah,
so
and you
cool.
actually produced like I don't remember how many minutes. It's like 4 or 5 minute short film, like a western. What'd you call it? Tell people where to find this. I want people to see this, like what you recently posted.
Yeah, it's 90 seconds because I was trying to stay in the because I primarily upload all my stuff to Instagram, so I was trying to stay in the real time. So it's 90 seconds. It's on my Instagram at Kavan the Kid, and it's called The Journey, and it's essentially a story of this lone gunman, and it also follows the story of this boy um, who had this like terrible tragedy in the past, but then the lone gunman saved him, and then he has another tragedy substantially further in his life in his 20s or 30s, and then the gunman shows up again mysteriously. um, I used a multitude of AI tools to create it. Obviously starting with Midjourney and Runway, but then there was a lot of stuff because I feel like Runway still has a lot of issues with human anatomy, especially on your wider shots when you're seeing the full body. So I used a lot of other tricks, like with like Leia picks, and then some of the other ones. If I wanted like a little bit more of expressive emotion, I'd use DID for like just simple face shots if there wasn't too much going on in the background, and then obviously your traditional tools as well. But yeah, no, I did that. I'd say the only element I didn't add to it was I didn't write it in Chat GPT. I wrote it with a friend of mine because we like writing stories ourselves. So that's the idea is like you may not have the budget to go out and just like create like a Western short. That's a lot of production. And so being able to use AI to tell a similar story was a lot of fun.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, this is exactly like Kavan is traditionally a photographer, and like this, I feel like Kavan is like exactly the kind of person, Caleb, like that would benefit from your boot camp and kind of what you guys are doing. And the thing about what you guys are doing at Curious Refuge is that it's not tool specific. Like there, I'm like as we discussed earlier, it's like as the tools change and improve, I'm assuming you're going to like kind of change the curriculum.
Right.
Um, Kevin, I'm curious. Like when we were earlier, when I was talking to Caleb about kind of the reaction in Hollywood, you're also in LA. Like, do you have any anecdotes? Like, what's the reaction to AI from your inner circle? Like, just off the record, like people who kind of like whisper to you what they really think.
I think it's definitely a mix. I think there's a lot of people that are excited about the tools and the benefits, but then I do think there's a lot of fear behind it. Similar to what Caleb said, I think where you see more of the fear is usually the people who've never actually played with the tools, so they don't quite have a full understanding of what it is and the capability. It's almost more of this myth that's getting built up that this ominous thing is going to come in and take my job. But then once you realize that what the tools can do and the benefits of it, it's actually more of something that can essentially 10x your workflow and also give you the opportunity to do things that you may not have been able to do, from a major industry standard. It's a little different because obviously they have an incredible amount of means to create whatever they want. But for the independent creator, I think these tools are so beneficial because you're now putting a lot of power into the people's hands to, especially as the tools, advance and only get better, to where they're going to be able to make stories, and we might start seeing a very unique set of voices emerge, especially in filmmaking.
I'm gonna let you drop off as we wrap up, but just one more time, give people your Instagram where they can find that short.
It's at Kavan the Kid, and it's pinned to the top. So if you go to my profile, it's literally the very first square.
Okay,
And
awesome.
thanks for
Kevin.
having me, guys.
Cool. So just to wrap up, I'm curious, like, what do you think, Caleb? Like, when will we get the first feature length AI generated film? Like, when do you think that happens? Like, everyone's always predicting or trying to predict, when will we have AGI, artificial general intelligence? When will the singularity arrive? I'm more interested, when will the first fully AI generated film arrive?
Well, it's very interesting to think about what that question is saying because it can mean a lot of different things, right? Do we mean the first film that integrates AI into a pipeline, in which case there's already been projects that have had that happen, right? So that box has been checked. But specifically, let's say the imagery, like what you see is entirely AI, and there's still human components, obviously, but at least every pixel that you see on the screen while you're watching it is generated through a computer. I would say my timeline keeps getting shorter and shorter, because back in May, I would have said, I don't know, 2 to 3 years. Now I would say probably we're probably 9 to 12 months away from something that's like feels good. I think we're probably going to see a feature film in the next 3 to 4 months. It's probably, for the artist, like I was saying earlier, like they probably are going to feel very proud of it, and it probably will be a technical achievement that is worth celebrating in its own right. But in terms of something that an audience who tends to be pretty unforgiving when it comes to quality standards and, the technical implementation that went into creating something, I'd say probably 9 to 12 months before we have something that is, Rotten Tomatoes fresh, if that makes sense.
That's very soon. Wow. All right. So again, wrapping up, if anyone wants to join your boot camp, it's curiousrefuge.com.
Yep.
The boot camp starts September 1st.
Yes. Yep. We start at the first of every month. And when you join, you aren't just joining for a 4-week boot camp. You're also getting updates for 6 months. So you're going to stay relevant. Your skills are going to continue to update. We are big mega AI nerds. So we just scour the internet. We look at all the tools, look at all the updates, and then disseminate what tool is really the best one for you to use at that time, and then give you the training to see it in action.
Okay, great. I want to kind of just finish there, but like, you're at ground zero. you're rubbing elbows with all of these, studio workers, creatives. Just I don't know, give me like an end. Like where do you see us this time next year in Hollywood specifically? Like when you're just like over coffee talking about the future. Like where do you see us in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I've never seen a shift this quickly in industry.
Same.
I mean, it just feels like things are really changing very quickly overnight. I do feel like there's a level of hype cycle that AI is bringing to not just the conversation related to Hollywood, but also just broader conversations around the entire world. But I mean, I would say that Hollywood at this time next year is still going to generally be operating the same way it is right now. Now, whether that's healthy or not healthy is your own ability to interpret. I would say the majority of folks would
Right.
say very unhealthy. But I do
Mm.
think that at least in the indie world and for video production professionals and for people who are trying to get their projects out for the first time, I think we're going to see more because of AI tools. And behind closed doors, all of these Hollywood studios are staffing up AI experts and bringing them into an ecosystem to where they can develop tools and then put those into pipelines. And so, for the average audience, I don't know if they're going to feel much of a difference, but for probably more specifically like VFX artists and people like that, they may see quite a few changes to their workflow. But it's really, and unfortunately, like I would love to say like I have all the answers, but I think truly no one knows exactly the way that all of this is going to shape up. And there was concerns even before AI about the long-term financial viability of Hollywood, and those conversations are still very much happening. So even without artificial intelligence being introduced into this entire conversation, the reality is when you adjust for inflation, Hollywood's has made 36% less this year versus I think 2015. I was like reading a report that was talking about that. And so like that's not a crazy sustainable model, as we continue to move forward. Hopefully big tentpole projects that really propel the industry like Oppenheimer and Barbie and just these bigger releases can help to sustain stuff, but honestly, who knows?
I saw your Barbenheimer video, by the way. That was pretty brilliant. So yeah, that Barbenheimer was just that was a phenomenon. It was a testament that movies are still alive. Like people
Yep.
still love going to the theater. So there is still a long life for Hollywood in general. Again, thanks for joining us. The website is curiousrefuge.com. Did you earlier? I mentioned it. It sounded like you maybe wanted to give a specific URL or no?
No, curiousrefuge.com. You can navigate around and see all of the interesting stuff that we offer up there. And then, of course, we're on social media at Curious Refuge on all the major platforms, so you can see some of our work there as well.
Awesome. And on that note, if you want to see previous episodes, listen or watch previous episodes of the 100 Year Podcast, you all can go to 100year.com. Again, we're kind of all over social media, but 100year.com would be the way station. And again, please, if you guys get a chance, go to 100year.substack because we're, as much as we deep dive on the podcast, we get even more specific and produce kind of data analysis on the newsletter. So please check that out. Again, Caleb Ward, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'll be keeping a close eye on what you guys are doing. And I think I really do think what you guys are doing is super important just because, you're part of kind of how people get over their fear of this and actually begin to embrace the tool. So thanks again, man. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.